I'm Andrew Miller. You can find me here. I work at Rubrik. I don't blog as much as I should. I came from the customer side for a while and the partner side for a while, random certs. And my spirit animal is not a koala, a llama, but it is a kangaroo, unlike my other esteemed colleagues. And
excuse me. Yeah, my name is Mike Fal. I'm a database solutions engineer at Rubrik. I've got a blog. I've got a Twitter. I've been a DBA for 15 years before coming to Rubrik, so I'm kind of used to sitting this on your guys' seats. And I have a cert because I could pass a test. I'm also a bit of a PowerShell nut and a data platform MVP, and I don't have a spirit animal. Just don't relate to any animals at this point. So go ahead.
So to keep kind of framing it up, we've gone through cloud cluster, running Rubrik in the cloud. We talked about cloud out, underlying cloud on. And you even saw how we took a VM and turned it into an instance to run here. We're even going to kind of tie it all together with this capability around SQL Server Live Mount, which is not a cloud-only feature, but can run purely in the cloud. You could use this in a cloud-only scenario, on-premises scenario, or even hybrid or multi. And we're going to get into that. Now, I'll beg a little bit of indulgence, because for the SQL Live Mount pieces, SQL Server Live Mount pieces to make sense, a brief review of how we protect SQL will make that work out. And I'll keep this in the 3 to 5 minute range, right? Because you've seen some of this in previous ones. So first, protection, as with everything, and I love some of the conversation earlier from Tim and sorry, others, I'm drawing blanks on names right now, but around simplicity. So whether it is VMware, which we started with, or SQL, or Linux or VMware, or Linux or Windows, focusing on operational simplicity. The way that I do it is this core architecture of SLA domain policies. Focus on the frequency, retention, replication, and archive. We actually consider this a little bit of a form of automation, because this is how we don't have to configure jobs and schedules. And I should have mentioned in previous lives, I ran Backup Exec, I ran Tivoli Storage Manager, now IBM Spectrum Protect, and whatever it gets renamed. I mean, all that stuff. This is how we avoid some of that core architecture that extends across all data types.
Oh, and if I can interject there too,
Please.
I think like one of the strengths that I see of it is, typically backup schedules are technology driven. I've got to schedule certain backups at certain times not to contend with each other. The strength of the core SLA domains is now it becomes a business driven architecture, that you make business driven decisions about your SLAs, and we merely map those out using the SLA domains.
From a protection standpoint, we use what we call a connector. So we don't need a job configuration staging servers. We call it a connector because we've kind of lost the term agent. There's no UI on this. It's sub 10 meg. After you install it, it actually can, if you want, have automatic updates. This is via actually some real specific work around an inner core, outer core design. Therefore, the nice little image there, right? They can help with the automatic updates without rebooting Windows, without restarting SQL. As you do the initial backups, the ingest, because we've got to get the data in initially, we're using Flash optimized parallel ingest, just as we do for everything else. But more importantly, after that, we do incremental forever. And this is relatively unique from a SQL Server backup standpoint. A lot of times you're looking at full dumps. Of course, that helps with optimizing network traffic. And if we can't handle logs, simple full recovery model, we probably shouldn't be standing up here. That's table stakes. We have the ability to handle that, as well as either do copy-only backups, how often we back up those logs and keep them for. Continue the operational simplicity theme, the point where we install the connector. It auto-discovers. You don't have to go find everything. It finds all the instances, SQL servers, the instances, all the databases. And then this is all pulled into a centralized management console. The same management console used for everything else in Rubrik. And then whether this is Linux, VMware, et cetera. And if you're thinking through this a little bit, well, I'm now getting a very different set of users, DBAs, good folks, right? But they're now into, good folks, right? I should say that.
I think they're good, because everybody loves data.
Everybody loves data, and yeah. So if you're thinking about it, now we've got a different set of folks that are getting into this console. So there are some abilities around role-based access control. Today, that's administrator and user. That can be granularly applied wherever you would think, database, instance level, et cetera. And even a specific option around, are you going to overwrite databases when you restore them? Because that's a common need. So at this point, we have gotten a Rubrik cluster. We are bringing data into it. We are talking to the connector. After the initial backup, we're doing incremental forever and just sending the change blocks across. So we've got, with a focus on operational simplicity, and I know I'm beating that to death a little bit, but that's like one of our core focuses here, because this is the part you've got to pay the price for. If you want all the other stuff that matters around recovery, you've got to do this, but you don't want to. You want to spend as little time and day-to-day management on this as you can. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike.
All right. Well, so thanks, Andrew, on the protection bit. And again, some of this recovery is going to be a little bit familiar, right? If you've seen previous field day stuff, you've probably seen some of this, but we're just going to touch on it again just to kind of give us a foundation for where we're moving to. So we do offer SQL Server point-in-time restores. Kind of like Andrew said, if we didn't have the table stakes functionality of doing point-in-time restores, we shouldn't be up here talking about stuff. But we do kind of give that operational simplicity with our screen to say, okay, well, we've got a slider, you pick a point in time. I know as a DBA, if I had to do a point-in-time restore, I had to find a full, maybe a differential, I had to get all my log backups, get them all in order, because if I didn't have the right order, it was going to break on me.
At 3 a.m. in the morning.
At 3 a.m. in the morning when I'm going, why did I choose this DBA life? Because, well, I did. So anyway, we go with this operational simplicity to try and make it easy on the DBA or whoever has to do those restores. Now we have 3 different recovery options. The first one, restore. This is your typical, hey, I need to restore the database to a point in time in the current place that it lives in. So we're going to overwrite the existing object with whatever restore point we need. And this is just your typical disaster recovery. Somebody broke the database, somebody corrupted the database. We need to replace the current asset with that database. The second is what we call export. Now let's be honest here, restore, export, it's really all restores. DBAs, we think of this all as the same thing. Export though, what that is a restore to some different location, whether it's a same server, new database with a different name, new server with a new database, however we want to do it, that's going to be our export option. And that's pretty much what we've had so far since we went GA with SQL Server integrated backup stuff. Now with 4.0, we have what we call Live Mount, and this is some really cool functionality. It's basically data virtualization. I like to think of this as giving our users the ability to use backups for more than just backups. Typically, you take a backup, you shove it off onto your tape, or you put it on disk storage, and it just sits there until you're like, oh gosh, I got to recover something, right? And it's basically collecting dust. What we want to say is, hey, let's give you the functionality to use that backup quickly, to virtualize that backup into some sort of usable database. And so what we're doing is, through our platform, we're giving you the ability to mount that backup directly off of our Rubrik appliance, whether it's the cloud cluster, whether it's an on-premises device, and bring that up in literally a matter of minutes, if not seconds.
Or even if you've taken on-premises and replicated to cloud cluster, do it from there.
Exactly.
Or vice versa.
Yeah. So this is at the point where we say, show me the demo. And so we will show you the demo. And I'm going to get logged into, so Rebecca, I'm kicking you off of the EC2 instance, just so you know.
That's actually this laptop over here.
Oh, I'm kicking Andrew off of it. Okay, there we go.
And what are the SQL Server requirements?
The SQL Server requirements, so we support SQL Server 2008 or greater, and any of the versions of that. And so actually that's kind of the thing, is several people ask me about Live Mount. It's like, well, do you support Live Mount? How far back do you support it? We go back to SQL 2008. And I think you'll see why as we get into the functionality. So I'm going to go ahead here and pull up the Rubrik cluster. And I believe, okay, well, we'll go in here. So what we can do is we can use the global search functionality, and I can start typing in something. So I'm going to go, I have a 10 gig database. Now, I think here you can see that I have 2 different options here. One is remote, so that's the on-premises cluster that we are replicating up to the cloud that Andrew used to do the cloud instantiation from. And then we have another one that we're backing up locally. So we're backing this up in 2 different places. I'm actually going to select the remote, and we'll go into that. And we're going to get a typical, when this comes up, the typical Rubrik calendar view, where on the left side we're going to have the overview option, the right side of the calendar view. Any questions so far? Is this all making sense to people? Okay. This is my song and dance as I wait for the spinny thing. There we go. All right. So again, what we try to do is we try to do this operational simplicity piece. And we try to make everything fairly intuitive. So we go to the calendar view, and again, everywhere we have a blue dot is a place that we can recover from, where we have recovery information. So let's go to the 25th. And on the 25th, I have some snapshots and I have some timelines where I've altered the database and moved it into full recovery model. Now I'm going to go here to this snapshot here at 1:55 a.m. And if I go to the ellipsis and click on it, I now have two options. If I can get over to it, and I can't, so I apologize. I have mount and I have export. So I'm going to go ahead and select mount, and much like a restore or export operation, I get the available instances connected to this cluster with the Rubrik connector service. In this case, I only have the one machine. We'll say next. We're going to select the instance and we're going to give it a name. And in this case, I'm just going to call it CFD2. And we'll say mount. And this gets started, and if I go to the Live Mount section on my object browser on the left and SQL Server DBs, you'll see I have an existing Live Mount and another one coming up. So I want to actually go to Management Studio here and show you a couple things using the existing cloud cluster. So the first is I always like to show this. This is a query against my database file locations using sys.master files. So if I run this, if I hit the right keys here, and now we'll zoom in. As Rebecca said, I promise, I'm a technologist. I know what I'm doing. What you'll notice here is for my two different data files, I've got, now for the physical name, instead of like a typical like C drive or D drive or what have you, I now have an IP address, a random string, and then if we went further out, we would see the file path name. What this is this is an SMB3 share. So the way that this works under the covers is we create an SMB3 share on the brick in our flash space. We then expose that to the SQL Server instance we're going to mount it to, and then we just attach the files just as if it were normal database files. I mean, you can do this with the UNC path in SQL Server today. One of the things I do like to call out with this particular UNC path, this SMB3 share, this is only visible to the machine that we're mounting it to. So if I have another machine in my network, it will not be able to browse to this SMB3 path. So this is kind of a security feature, right, to minimize who can get, because I can go into a file explorer and browse that path from this machine.
So does Rubrik set up then the security on the Rubrik appliance to is it a username and password to connect to it? I mean, as an
as far as the SMB3 share, I believe it's just a limit of like IP addresses. So we recognize the network address of the machine that we're mounting it to, and basically allow it only that way.
And obviously there would be potentially a bit of a performance limitation because you are reading SQL files over the network rather than...
Let me get to that here in a moment. I want to show one other thing here, and then we'll talk to kind of how that works. So if I go a little further down, I like to run this other query. This is against sys.databases. And what I always... Again, this is more of a DBA thing. And once again, I can't seem to hit the right keys.
Perfect. It was perfect.
Well, no, I'm going to zoom in now, Karen, for you.
That's better.
But you're going to see here that this is against sys.databases. So this appears as just a regular database to SQL Server. SQL Server doesn't see this as any sort of strange black voodoo magic. And what I like to call out is we have a create a database ID. That source database ID is null. What this means is we're not making use of SQL Server's database snapshot technology. We're doing our own thing here, and that's the mounting of the files off the SMB3 share. We have a recovery model of simple, and isRead-only is 0, which means it's a read-write database. And this is kind of going to what you were asking about. When we do this mount, we're creating basically a read-write copy of your data. It's a virtualized copy of your database. However, our file system is immutable. We don't want to be messing with your backup file. We don't want to change your recovery chain or give you, somehow disrupt that snapshot that you're going to use. So what we do is we track the deltas that go on with that live mount as it exists and over time. So kind of to your point, there is a performance hit, but we're a data protection company. We're not like trying to get into the tier 1 storage business. And we're not going to come to you and say, hey, you can just run your databases off of Rubrik. Don't worry about your regular storage. No, you can run your databases off of Rubrik in maybe a disaster recovery scenario, but there is going to be a degraded performance to that. So does that answer your question and kind of where you were going at?
Yeah.
Awesome. Any other questions on that? I've been talking for a bit here.
4 minutes.
4 minutes? Wow, that's a long time. So if I go here to databases and I click refresh, you're going to see now that I have CFD2 appear there. So in all that time, my live mount has come up. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, well, yeah, Mike, but that was a 10 gig database. I can restore a 10 gig database in about 4 minutes on the right scenario. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to switch. I'm sure you all appreciate the challenges of getting 1 terabyte of test data up into the cloud. But we have a 1 terabyte database in our lab. So what I'm actually going to do, and this is also another thing I want to show you, everything we do in Rubrik is there's a call to an API. And actually, some collaboration. Chris Wall wrote most of the original PowerShell model. I've done some collaboration with him. So everything we do, we have PowerShell code that we can wrap around this. So I have a PowerShell script here, and this is going to go to my 1 terabyte database and spin up a live mount of it on one of my lab instances. So I'm going to go ahead and initialize this. We'll run it. There we go. It's going to ask me to confirm my action. Yes. And we're off to the races. So now if I open up my browser, which will go to Google News, but we'll skip that for now. And then we will go to our lab instance. And this is where I blame the Wi-Fi. Come on up. There we go. So I'm logged in. I'm going to go to Live Mounts, SQL Server DBs. And in the amount of time that it took me to log in, I mounted a read-write copy of a 1 terabyte database. So this is something to kind of start to wrap your brains around. Again, we're not offering this as Tier 1 storage. This is not necessarily going to perform as quickly, but think about it. I mean, as a DBA, and actually this is probably a good time to jump into the use cases.
This is also where we just say, isn't that cool?
Well,
right?
yeah.
Somebody?
So this is where we can start talking about the use cases, right? I mean, the ability, again, to quickly get at those backups. Your backups aren't just sitting there waiting for you to run through a full restore of them anymore. So ad hoc restores, granular restores, or object level recovery, however you want to call it. Somebody came along to my 1 terabyte database and ran a query without the where clause and deleted a bunch of rows, right? Because that never happens. And now, instead of me having to, I've got to allocate additional storage, I've got to go through the entire time of the restore, now I can quickly live mount a copy of that database and make it accessible to whoever and bring the data back.
This was actually where before 4.0 was released, I was talking with a friend who's a DBA. He's got an infrastructure sense, but when he heard about this, he got more excited than I thought he should, maybe. But it was because he'd been through so much pain around those scenarios of having to bring big databases back for teeny little amounts of data that was critical to the business or thought to be critical to whatever executive wanted it back, that kind of thing. So
was this doing a remote live mount as well? Or did I...
So the first database that we did, we mounted to the EC2 instance, and the database itself was being backed up locally. So it was a remote instance, it was on premises. The 1 terabyte database is all on premises, but again, I want to touch on, Rubrik is a software-based product, so it's whether you're running it on premises or in the cloud, it's the same software.
Okay, yes, I'm asking the wrong question then.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
No, apologies for that. I'm the question. Because if you then powering up a 1 terabyte database, but it's remotely connected to the Rubrik to recover from a failure. That's only half the job, because then you need to get that database back onto the original SQL Server and the original storage.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. So, and what we tend to call this internally is, so you have, with our instant recovery for VMs, right, we make use of the storage vMotion technology to move off of that. We don't have that for SQL Server yet. We are targeting it for a future release. It's definitely something on our roadmap. This is kind of, this is just the case of iterative development. We get a good core feature, we start with it, we find out what other use cases are.
This could be your get out of jail free card. Someone deleted a row in your database.
Yeah,
my business is going, I'm going out of business if this database is not up. I can get it out, and then in a maintenance window you could...
Exactly. So we started talking about the ransomware. I mean, WannaCry hit databases too, right? It didn't just, oh, I'm just going to hit VMs, and if they have a database, I'll be nice. No, I mean... So if something hits you with ransomware, you can bring that database back up on a live mount to get up and going quickly. Now again, right now, we have ways internally, we've got some design patterns that we can get you off of that, but it's not baked into the product. As we go forward, again, on the roadmap, we're going to get it to the point where you basically just push button and say, okay, bring up the live mount, but also start seeding it out to a physical location that we can eventually move you off to.
You can use log shipping to while the backup copy is up and running.
You know, just to talk about a couple things here, like SQL Server recognizes this just as a database. There's again no black voodoo magic. It's just another database. So we could log ship off of it. We could we've talked about how can we get the Live Mount added into an availability group, right? So that when you get everything up and ready, you just fail over from one to the other. That's a fairly complicated scenario, all doable, and actually we're going to be working on some white papers on how you go about that. But again, it's a database, so if you can do it with a SQL Server database, you can do it with a Live Mount. All right, other use cases that we can kind of talk through is health checks. So one of the things DBAs are usually pretty fastidious about is saying, I need to run a DBCC check to make sure my database isn't corrupted. But running a DBCC check against a production database is a pretty invasive workload. So with this, you know, usually what is suggested is, oh, well, just restore your database off somewhere else and then run against a DBCC check against the restore. Again, you have to allocate storage for that. You have to get resources for that. In the case of this, I live mount my database off to another instance. I don't need any additional storage, and now I can run that offline DBCC check and validate the consistency of my database. Dev test workloads, I mean, to me, this is where my automation, my DevOps brain starts to whirl. So, you know, think of if I can just get a copy of my production data, I can see what a production release is going to look like before I actually release to production.
Schema upgrades, I mean, a lot of painful stuff you want to script ahead of time instead of having to do major restores.
I mean, it's probably not that big of a deal because we all know that dev and production look the same, right?
No.
That was a joke. But that's the thing is, again, everything, if we go back to that PowerShell script I wrote to spin out the Live Mount, I can integrate that with Jenkins or with TeamCity or whatever your other continuous development, continuous integration pipeline is. And suddenly you can spin out a copy of your database, unit test your release, send the stuff out, automate the whole thing. So for the gentleman who was tweeting out about clicky, we're trying to get away from that. And there are other use cases, right? There are other use cases.
You were really good. You looked at the ceiling when you said that, I think so.
Anyway, the thing is this is just what we thought of, right? And Rubrik, the way we view this is we engage with our customers as it's a partnership, right? Our customers, you guys, right? You're going to think of use cases that we may not have thought of. So there's going to be this back and forth engagement between us to say, what other things can we do with Live Mount? What other use cases, what other scenarios can we support with the product? And that's pretty much it. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over. Does anybody have any other questions? I'm sorry. No? All right, either I did a really good job explaining it or I did a terrible job. I'm going to turn it back over to Andrew to wrap us up.
I feel like I've just got a beat to death. 1 terabyte, you had to log in, it was already up. Okay, done beating the horse. So you could have all of this with Rubrik 4.0 that is GA now, right? So that's Cloud Cluster, Cloud Out for a while, Cloud On instantiation. This is where when we were thinking about coming to Cloud Field Day, because we didn't want to come in and try and cloud wash existing stuff. Some of these have applicability on-prem, some of the applicability from a cloud perspective, even both, maybe call it hybrid. This is all stuff that you can use today. And with that, our tagline, as you know, is don't back up, go forward.